Early in 1963, I had been appointed um, by IVS, that's the International Voluntary Service, to be a volunteer teacher of maths and science at Swaneng Hill School, which had been just opened in the village of Serowe in the Bechuanaland Protectorate in southern Africa. So here I am flying out of London Airport by BOAC and arriving in Salisbury, southern Rhodesia, and then down to Bulawayo, and then on the train down south into Botswana. The railway line ran from Bulawayo through Bechuanaland towards Mafeking in South Africa. But here was I on the train, and we would alight at Palapi, the village of Palapi, and here we are, I think here, just crossing over the border into Bechuanaland, and therefore quite separate from either southern Rhodesia or South Africa. And Botswana is such a dry, arid country, very flat, and I was arriving in August 1963, which and the country would have had no rains for about 3 or 4 months, so everywhere was looking very dry. There were no tarred roads. All the roads, apart from I think 10 miles in either Francistown or Labatse or down south. And I was going to the village of Serowe, which is about 30 miles off from Palapi on the railway line, and arriving in Serowe to join the small staff of Swaneng Hill School. And here we are at work on the first classrooms, laying the foundations. That meant digging the foundations, and here we have one of the students learning about building, making the foundations for the first classroom, which is what we can see now. And in the background are the hills of Swaneng, the Swaneng Hills. The first classroom outside, this group of pupils being taught by Liz van Rensburg. The school had been founded by Patrick and Liz, and here is Liz teaching under a tree a class of Botswana young people, because the classroom had not yet been finished. And this was very common in Bechuanaland at that time, and we were therefore working hard on the construction of the various classrooms and workshops and laboratories and staff housing. The land is extremely dry. We were always accompanied by goats. Goats are ubiquitous in Bechuanaland, now Botswana, and they can survive on anything. The dry thorn bushes, which were all around the site, and they would eat anything available. But one can see already how many classrooms were going up on the Swaneng Hill site. Some of them, I say, were classrooms, others were workshops for woodwork and metalwork and so on. And the first pupils, the pupils arriving for the morning assembly, always outside, and the assembly was being taken by Patrick. Here is Patrick van Rensburg. Here are some latecomers coming in from neighbouring Serowe, and we have the two big hills of Swaneng in the background. The biggest one was called Ras Swaneng, Father Swaneng. The slightly smaller one was called Ma Swaneng, Mother Swaneng, and then all the children. But here the classrooms are finished, so the teaching could take place inside. The facilities by that stage were really rather good. Here is Patrick up at the front with his own notebooks, and he really was a very good teacher. He would be teaching. Well, he would teach all subjects. Primarily, he introduced a subject called development studies to help the pupils to understand how countries develop and are able to work themselves out of poverty. We had a fairly good proportion of both girls and boys in the school. Here again is Patrick up at the front. and each pupil had their own desk and seat and notebooks and so on. And I think here we can see the lunch being prepared. There was a cook on the site to make the food for the students and for the staff. The basic, what he is doing here, is stirring up mealie meal from maize turned into mealie meal, and this would form the students' main course for the day. And here they are enjoying their lunch of maize meal and possibly some vegetables, some stewed vegetables, and then very occasionally some goat meat. But there was always building work going on the site. Much of the building work was being done by the students of the school. They would stay on after school to work on the construction of the school. And also we had voluntary work being done on a Saturday morning. And they were both building their own school, but also they were learning, in doing so, they were learning how to mix up concrete for the foundations, mix up mortar for bricklaying and so on. So this was a very, very common activity for all the students and for the staff. All the staff were somehow expected to join in, and I think we all learned quite a lot about building, how to mix up mortar and concrete. On the whole, it was only the boys who were doing this voluntary building work, but gradually we encouraged the girls to join in as well. There was a plentiful supply of sand from the local riverbeds. There were no flowing rivers in the area, but plenty of riverbeds which would flow when the rains came during the summer months. But lots of hard work of mixing up concrete to lay the foundations, which is what this young lad is doing. And of course, lots of stone, lots of gravel. And in this case, the foundations have been laid, and so the first bricklaying was being done. And we had one a volunteer teacher, Martin Kibblewhite, from the UK, who was a qualified architect and builder, and he's giving instruction in bricklaying at this stage. So Martin was responsible for much of the teaching alongside local instructors in teaching good quality bricklaying, and also ensuring that the standards were good. And this being 1963, I know from experience that these buildings have stood the test of time. Michael Hawke, have been back a number of times, and 60 years later, these buildings are still in very good condition. So that's all credit to these young Botswana men and the instruction that they were receiving from, in this case, Martin Kibblewhite. And so much of the time, the site was really a building site. The children were having their education in the midst of a building site, but there were enough buildings up. Here we can see the staff quarters, the rondavels, in which we as volunteer staff lived, and Patrick and Liz van Rensburg, and then the buildings, the initial buildings, and then looking down over the school grounds. And it was a case of, over the years, trying to turn that into arable land and also land for rearing goats and cattle. And one can see here how this land all nestles in the area in the shadow of the famous Swaneng Hills, Swaneng, Swaneng, and then all the Swaneng family of hills curving round the school. It was a wonderful sight. But it did have problems. There were lots of what were called dongas, just riverbeds, really small riverbeds, which had to be dammed up so as to combat erosion. So a common feature of the site was building small dams to provide water for the cattle. Plentiful cattle around. Most Botswana would own at least one cow, and many had quite large herds. But these cattle, of course, need water. So on the Swaneng site, we had a small valley which we were able to construct a dam across, and this would be the construction of the dam. And in the next rainy season, the dam did fill up, and that provided water for the cattle, but also enough water to start to irrigate the land. But it was very important to combat erosion, so we were forever building small dam walls on the site in the dongas, so as years went by with the rains, they would silt up and stop the topsoil from being washed away. But it was pretty tough going, the land. Not easy to grow vegetables, but we did manage to do so. But moving into Serowe village, Serowe itself had a very large church, a Protestant church, the LMS, the London Mission Society. That's the Mission Society of the Congregational Church. And they had this large church in the middle of Serowe, and this is a very posh wedding taking place. It was the wedding of a member of the Khama royal family. And the Botswana really enjoy celebrating. This is the other side of the wealth and the poverty contrast of Botswana. But on a big royal wedding, which was taking place here in Serowe at the LMS church, everybody certainly came out with their best dresses on. Maybe the only good dress they had, but it was a fine celebration, and the Botswana certainly know how to celebrate. Whether it's celebrating a wedding like this, I say a member of the Khama royal family, or whether it's yes, Serowe. I think that is Serowe Khama. But it was, I think he had come up for this wedding of the royal family. Swaneng was actually given by a South African refugee a small old car, this black car, and we used that just to go backwards and forwards into Serowe village centre, mainly to collect the post. These are the rondavels in which the staff lived. Most of the staff were expatriates, like myself. This is Martin Kibblewhite, and we all lived in the thatched rondavels, and we had this central common room, which was an excellent place for meeting. And this is Diane. This is Don Baker and his family, and Liz van Rensburg with Tommy and Patrick, and our Botswana member of staff who taught Setswana. So this was almost the total staffing at that time. The Baker family, the Van Rensburgs, Patrick, and then this is myself, Mike Hawkes, and Martin and Mary Kibblewhite. So I think I was the only single man on the staff. That is Tommy there in a pushchair, Tommy Van Rensburg. He was born in Surrey Hospital. And so we had quite a number of young people there, and this lady was our cook. So, and her assistant. So we were quite a small, multiracial community which started off Swaneng. And Patrick and Liz would live in that end part of the main common room, and we as staff lived in the staff rondavels. And this was a very, very common sight of men bringing in dead wood from trees in the area, because wood, of course, was the fuel for cooking. So the wood was being sawn up, chopped up, and then the school cook would make the mealie meal porridge in these large iron pots, which incidentally came from manufactured in Scotland, I noticed. And this is a very small school garden, but it was productive. Lots of cabbages and onions and tomatoes, and those three together would make up relish, as the students called it. The cook would cook those three vegetables, cabbage, onions, relish, and tomatoes together to produce relish. So the school lunch would be lots of mealie meal porridge. He had been stirred up in these large iron pots and then served to the students, mealie meal with relish, and then once a week including some goat meat. But meat was, although cheap to us, it was still relatively expensive for the ordinary person, so meat was only on the menu once a week for the students. And here the chickens were being reared, so this was an important source of mainly protein in the form of eggs, but also chickens themselves. So the Swaneng site was made up of the secondary school, the training centres, brigades, and then the farm, gradually growing over the years. And here the students are cutting down trees, but there was a reason for that, because they wanted to make their own sports field. So the thorn trees, which were on the site, they were being chopped down and then hacked out of the ground so that the land could be cleared for a sports field. Here there was a day when the community were invited in to come and look at the work, seeing what work was being done on the site, to clear the site, to construct the buildings. And there was a great effort to involve, here is Liz van Rensburg, and there was a great effort was made to invite people in from local families so they could see what their young people were doing and how the school was progressing. And they would also contribute their labour, they would also contribute gifts of money if they could afford it. Otherwise they would give goats or cattle to help in the building of the school. And here is Patrick with Martin Kibblewhite laying out the site for a new building, probably a new classroom. So digging out the foundations it just seemed to be always going on. And the men and the women would contribute their own building skills. The women traditionally built mud brick rondavels, so both the men and the women were quite expert in basic building skills, the importance of foundations, and there was always a great spirit of the local people working with the expatriate staff, led by Patrick. He was a great visionary, and really he provided the vision for the whole project. So here, I guess, would be another, I would think, classroom being constructed by local families, men and women coming along to deliver bricks, and here again there's Liz with Tommy van Rensburg. Tommy grew up in Botswana, and that brings us to the end of my own home movie from my 1 year spent at Swaneng Hill School in 1963-64, a year that certainly changed my life, because I returned later, a few years later, with my wife Jan, who started Swaneng Primary School, and then we stayed on longer to move to Mahalapi to start the Madiba School and Brigades. So I will sign off, and thank you for listening and watching this film about the founding of Swaneng Hill School in Serowe in Botswana. Right. 21 minutes and I paused it.
Yep, okay, good.